Hello and welcome to our interview. Today we are speaking with Ochieng Russell, who will introduce us the concept of conservation farming, non-plowing farming, and the farming that he does, that it's called farming God's way. Additionally, he'll share his personal experience and discuss the impact of this approach on agriculture yields. Before we begin, let me briefly introduce myself. My name is Andreas Hosang, and I became involved in this topic through a unique experience. 2 years ago, I translated for a farmer from Brazil during an event where he spoke about the farming methods they used to support and found Lesperos Children's Village. While translating, I was so surprised by what he was describing that I thought, this guy must be crazy. But as I reflected on it, I became curious and I decided to learn more about these concepts. What I have seen here on the ground in Kenya has been incredibly convincing and has completely erased my initial skepticism. Thank you at this point for taking the time, Russell, to show me the different kind of projects you are conducting under the umbrella of the worldwide movement Farming God's Way. So the first thing is about your personal background. Before we dive into the concepts, could you share a bit about your personal background? How did you get into farming and what led you to move away from extensive farming practices?
Thank you so much, Brother Andreas. It's a pleasure to come to you all, and I'm so privileged by God to be able to be part of this wonderful interview today. Let me say this, I have a background in farming. I come from a farming community, a farming and fishing community. And so farming themes and farming practices were introduced to me at a very early age. But as it is the norm, so many people move away from the farming activities and go to cities and look for other things. Let me say this, that my interest developed from a farming background out of just a desire to see things grow, a desire to see things mature, and a desire to see things going well. So growing up, I began taking studies on farming. And that's what led me to the university, and I did agriculture at undergraduate as well as a postgraduate. And then when I joined the working force, I worked for 8 years in a heavy commercial profit maximization operation in Tanzania, came and did the same for a year in Uganda. And then by the time I was coming back to Kenya, I did a few stints here and there in the same field. But being a Christian, and I think this would answer the question why I moved away from some of these, being a Christian, I was continuously convicted on the idea that some of the farming practices that we were engaging were not improving the soils, were very harmful to the soils, harmful to the crops, and consequently harmful to people. And because of those convictions that I had, my heart began looking for something that would be a different alternative and approach to what I was doing at the time. Now, I knew about conservation agriculture, I knew about no-till practices, but a friend of mine introduced me to Farming God's Way. And because it came with a very catchy name, something that I had not heard before, I attended a training with them at the Creation Care site in Kenya, Kijabe. And when the first time I did it, the first training just hit right where my heart was really persuaded to follow. And so I went back to Tanzania with those thoughts, and I went back to the farming activity we did. I did a few trials over a period of 1 season, and I noticed the amount of profits, the amount of health of crops, health of soils. It really answered quite a lot of questions for me. And so that began my journey from the conventional agricultural systems to a more sustainable, more conservation agricultural approach that would answer those questions. I think that's me for now.
Thank you very much for your personal background. So the people, they might listen to it when it is or will be published on LinkedIn. They might not have so much of background about what all those different kind of farming concepts are. So in Europe, of course, people, I would expect, are aware about farming in greenhouses is done with artificial nutrition when the plants are not growing on real soil. Could you please explain quick what is conservation farming in a nutshell? What is non-plowing farming? And then what is farming God's way? And as conservation farming and non-plowing farming is older than the farming God's way concept, so could you please start with conservation, then non-plowing, and then what is the top up on farming God's way?
I think when thinking about these and looking at all these subsets of agriculture, the idea here is conventional farming systems have continuously proven to be hazardous to the environment, to the crops, and to the people who are sustained by those environments. And so because of that, other concepts and approaches have been coming up time and time again. Now, some of the oldest concepts would be conservation agriculture, whose agricultural practices actually go towards the improvement of the soil and the environment for the crop, and ideally for the people who are sustained by those crops. Conservation agricultural approach actually includes no-till practices, the use of we call them biological agents for soil improvements and organic matter improvements. Conservation agriculture involves the whole gamut of creation, and so you're looking at animals being involved in your farming activities. You're looking at the land being improved. It's not necessarily the feeding of the crop, but actually the improving of the soil. Now, conservation agriculture is one broad area of looking. Now, from conservation agriculture, we begin to find other subsets, including the no-plowing or no-till planting systems of agriculture. That is just a part of the conservation agriculture. Now, farming God's way comes with the elements of conservation agriculture, but from a strong biblical outlook. That is actually the difference between conservation agriculture and farming God's way. Farming God's way has three spheres. And when you look at the first sphere, it's biblical. Then you have the management and you have the technological approaches to its activity. Conservation agriculture only has the technological and management practices. It does not have the biblical sphere. And so for me, being a Christian, it resonated well with my beliefs in the faith to go with farming God's way, which is ideally an improvement on conservation agriculture. The management practices, the technological approaches, ideally do not veer too far from the conservation agricultural concepts. And so ideally what we are looking at is practices that include no plowing, no burning of your crops, feeding the plants from the top. We are looking at covering your crops with organic material, which can decompose and degrade into becoming more humus to the soil. Again, goes a long way in improving the soil. Covering your soils, making sure that the concepts that God is using in the forest are brought into the farm. We are looking at management practices of people being on time. We are living in days where climate change is becoming quite a big concern, and it's a concern worldwide. Now, approaches that can be climate smart, which are like farming God's way, are approaches that will be very vital during these seasons to ensure that we are buffered from the adverse effects of climate change and ensure that farmers actually have something to eat. Now, I have seen quite a lot of improvements in soils, improvements in farmer nutrition. I've seen a lot of improvements in people's activities on their lands, and that is why I really am doing farming God's way.
Thank you for introducing to the audience the concept of those different approaches, how to deal with the land and with the people. And as you mentioned, extensive farming might do much more harm to nature, to people and to animals. And with those conservation farming and farming God's way, we do not only get crops, we also pay back to the soil, we pay back to the nature. For days, we work together to train people in the field here in the nearby Ukonda and applied the methods directly on their fields. Could you explain how it went and what were the results you observed when the people started on Monday and when we left on Thursday? What was the impact you observed?
By the grace of God, I've been doing a bit of these trainings for quite some time now. And I'm so grateful that one of the things we've noticed is that on ground we've been able to double productivity on different farms on average. Some farms much better than others, but we've been able to do much. Now, for the training that we've had in the past few days, my indicators for impact were two coming in. First of all is the capacity of people to take in the information. So using different questions here and there, using different tests here and there, to be able to gauge whether my participants were actually understanding and getting the simple concepts that we were passing through. Then secondly, also looking at the questions that they are asking and the willingness, the intelligence of the questions they're asking and willingness to practice were also an indicator for me. Now, for a training of 4 days, ideally you will not see the impact on the ground, but that is a follow-up idea, so that when we come back after a month or two, we'll be able to see what is happening. But looking at the training itself, I would say it was very impactful. We had people asking very intelligent questions, really pausing to ask and think about their farms, think about where they are, what they've been doing, confessing some of the mistakes they've been doing here and there, and also asking intelligent questions on some of the concepts that we were running through. That tells me that that the training really touched where it needed to touch. It also tells me that these are people who are willing, because during the training, we also had sessions where we had practical applications on one of the farms of the farmers who is also a practitioner right now of Farming God's Way. And we could see how people were joyfully engaged in the activities, how they would like to be part of it, and how they would like to see the results of it. And for me, that is an indicator that that training really got to people's hearts. A few other trainings, you might find that people are not very interested. Some of them are just walking around. Some of them are not asking intelligent questions. Some of them are not engaging that much. Some of them are not bringing real-life dilemmas in their farms to the training. But this particular training saw people bringing real-life dilemmas, real-life questions to the training, which to me is an indicator that that training was actually addressing real-life issues.
So a training session goes 4 days. We had theoretical inputs, we had practical applications by showing them what is the benefit of covering the soil by the erosion experiment. Mm-hmm. At the end of the 4th day, we did the decomposing place for creating new humus.
Okay.
And we had one team that were part of the first training in March 2024. Mm-hmm. And we went together on the field and we saw what they did. Mm-hmm. So most of their crops died, as you have as well trained them. Mm-hmm. Why did they fail with so many crops?
All right. It's interesting to note. So one of the things that I noticed with the crops that failed, they encountered a soil-borne disease. And soil-borne diseases take a long time to really deal with. And so one of the things that we advise under such circumstances is Farming God's Way reaches its optimal productivity levels in 5 years. And so going into the farm with high-value crops that are susceptible to these diseases might not be the wisest way. And that was one of the questions we were trying to answer.
So in this case, it were tomatoes and
In this case was
melons
tomatoes.
that are called, so that the audience also can follow what we are talking about, are so-called high-value crops.
And so they encountered what is called bacterial wilt, and bacterial wilt is mostly soil-borne in nature. And so there are other farms that did not encounter that, and they witnessed of wonderful harvests. But this particular one that we visited encountered it, and so my advice for them is to continue practicing farming God's way with other crops before reintroducing the same crops at a later date, having really improved their soil structures, improved their soil pHs, improved their activities on farming God's way and how they apply the principles in farming God's way. One thing I also noticed was that most of the land, the percentage cover of the land was not 100%. And that speaks for many things. So the practicing of farming God's way must be to very high standards and faithfully, knowing that the end results really depend on what you do on the ground.
Yeah, now it might sound, you mentioned a lot this name, farming God's way, and someone who is undistant with religion might think, yeah, is this some kind of a magic? I was with you on the field, so we took out the tomato plants, we cut the root off, we saw the disease that came, we checked the soil, and we saw that there is a fungus. It is also the land has a certain kind of falling down, water is collected. So, and then we took the time with those two guys and discussed a plan for 4 months to plant spinach and different kind of crops. I guess we had like 11 different kind of plants that will be planted, so-called low value crops, with the intention to heal the disease in the ground so that we can start again with high value crops by the end of 2025. So this is knowledge that you have from your background as a farmer from school. So there is no magic, there is real science behind. Am I right?
Very true. Bacterial wilt, some of the ways of seeing whether you have bacterial wilt or not is you just simply, these are physical ways of doing it. Just simply pick out the plant at the very base of it, try and cut out the skin of the root, go to the cambium layer, you'll see it browning. Ideally, browning means the death of the xylem and phloem tissues, which the bacteria actually attacks, and it cuts off the food and water passageways for the plant, so the plant wilts. Those are standard approaches on how to determine what disease is on your field. And once we've determined that this is the particular disease on the field, we begin to engage some of the practices that actually are involved. Let me also say this. The name Farming God's Way is important. As much as somebody might look at it in a more religious approach, it is important because we believe God was the first farmer. I mean, it is drawn from the scriptures. Now, I won't go into that much, but what I would say is that the concept of it goes a long way in healing the land and ensuring a bountiful harvest. And I think that is what all of us need. That is what all of us are looking for. And so, and especially for Africa, where the hunger rates are much higher, this is truly a tool that can really revolutionize our agricultural practices. Going back to our farm, once you've identified the disease that you are actually fighting with, and for this case it was a soil-borne disease, in standard agricultural practices, soils can be fumigated with very heavy chemicals that will kill almost everything. But there are approaches that can be used to actually improve your soils without necessarily using some of these destructive and some of these degenerating approaches. Now, when you do simple practices like covering your soils, it speaks to lowering the temperatures of the soil. It affects the pH of the soil. It affects the nutrient balances of the soil. It also affects the balance between fungus and bacteria in the soil. Now, as you improve your organic matter, which you have called humus, as you improve your organic matter, you are bringing the balance of fungus and bacteria in your soil to an optimal operational level. Now, that is the secret of healing the land on matters bacteria and fungal diseases.
Yeah.
And that takes time. You have to go through the first cycle, the second cycle, and the third cycle. And so when a farmer immediately hits the roadblock of these diseases, then I encourage them to rotate their crops, move to crops that are not affected by these diseases, and be faithful with the practices over a season, over 2 or 3 seasons, before they can now begin again going back to the crops of their choice.
Yeah, I saw the concept of crop rotation. This is also what we applied on the plan for this team. And then in every 7th year, letting the field rest, like it is written in the Bible, that like the Israelites were doing it. I heard ideas like pesticide, like pee of rabbits. I was really like, okay, you even can make business with pee of rabbits. There was some appliance with water, with natural soap.
Exactly.
So there is a lot of practical things in it. And what impressed me the most in your approach of farming God's ways, you really just need simple things. You do not need a lot of money. And still the 4-day training seems to me like the first input.
Exactly.
And then it needs a follow-up, as we saw with the guys on the field, because they did not understand why the ground is killing their plants. So that needed a follow-up.
Yes.
We created a quality management plan for them, so with taking pictures, slicing the plants, so that with remote support you can assist them. So that's useful and it's necessary. Huh?
Sure,
Knowledge doesn't fall from heaven just by that. It
Exactly.
needs practice, it needs time. And I understood after 9 months or 3 seasons here in Africa, it's in Europe different. You can't harvest 4 times a year.
Yes.
But here it works. So after 3 to 4 seasons,
Yes.
in general, the ground is ready to bring fruits. And we went to Nairobi and I saw some amazing results.
Sure.
Broccoli that has the size of this guy on the other side. And it was, it really looked great.
Sure.
So let's now make a competition or comparison of conservation farming and God's way farming.
Okay.
If you look on the fields, is the harvest different?
Well, when you look at quantities in harvest, they may not vary that much. Ideally, because the conservation agriculture really follows the same approach as farming God's way in terms of technology and management practices. I would say for me, the commitment is what is more important, because ideally conservation agriculture does not come with the idea of transformation. It comes mostly with the idea of development. Transformation is where the people, it's not just the land which is changing, but the people that the land supports are also changing. And I think that is very key if you're going to look at sustainable profitabilities. When you're looking at long-term profits, I would say farming God's way will do much better for people, and especially in Africa, than conservation agriculture.
Yeah, let's frame it that way. I was reading once in a book about the city Tirana, and there came someone in controlling the city that was before something like an artist, and he had in mind to paint the city and plant trees, so to make things more beautiful. And people were like irritated, why is he wasting money for that? But actually criminality went down, economical strength went up. So as we are here in Ukunda, and friends of mine told me this area is quite a little bit dangerous. It's not recommended to be here where we are actually. So in the communities where you are working, does farming God's way have such effects like I mentioned in this example of Albania, actually the city Tirana?
Definitely. I mean, you're looking at people not only thinking about what they will eat and what they will sell to the market, but you're looking at people who are now thinking about how the neighbor is surviving, how the neighbor is feeling, and from their farming practices, going a long way into ensuring that the general community is better developed, better transformed. And I think that is very key in the days and ages that we are coming in. Now, conservation agriculture will still be using some of the agrochemicals that we are trying to advocate not for use. It will still be using some fertilizers that we are trying to advocate not to be used. And so I would say in the long gamut, when you're looking at profitabilities in the whole of creation, farming God's way will do much better. Productivities will be higher, relationships will be built, families will be improved, and those are the important areas of our livelihoods. It's not just the incomes and productivity we are looking at. We are looking at a sustainable profitability approach that goes far beyond just money in our pockets and food in our stomachs. But when we look at just productivity alone, let me give you figures. We have found within our own demo plots in Kijabe, Kenya, we have found that farming God's way improves productivity by an average of twice. And so if a farm is producing, like in Kenya here, we have found it's known, it's a known fact in Kenya and East Africa, that most farms on average produce just 5 100 kg bags of maize per season, per acre. Now with farming God's way, we've seen them increase those bags to 23, 25 bags per acre in the very first season. We now have somebody actually doing 40 bags per acre. And you saw a farm that actually has maize on it per acre, and that gentleman there produces between 38 bags to 43 bags per season of growing crops. And so you can see right from 5 bags to 40 bags. That's really an improvement in productivity. And now he's not only thinking about himself, but he's also encouraging people, reaching out to people so that they can learn the same tool and apply it on their own farms. He's also educating family members and it's improving the family structures, it's improving their income and their income disposal, their expenses are much reduced, and you're using the natural existing substances that God has actually given to us.
So could we say it that way, farming God's way is a movement that not only wants to have an impact of regenerating soil, it wants to regenerate communities, establish relationships, and actually that communities help each other. So commercial companies, they speak about purpose-driven. Mm-hmm. So would I be right if I say farming God's way is a way to give farming a purpose that goes beyond of myself?
So let me look at it this way. The short answer is yes. It gives farming the right purpose. It gives farming the original right purpose. Let me look at it this way. The whole of creation is divided into 5 areas. That is the people, the land, the water, the animals and insects, and the trees and plants. 5 areas. Now, if your farming activity is not affecting these 5 areas, it means there is a link that has been broken. And that is what farming God's way comes to do. It not only regenerates the land, it ensures that the gamut of creation, the plants and insects within the soil begin to regenerate as well. And as they play, they also improve the soils. It ensures that we have agroforestry within our farms. So it's not just the plant of choice, but we also have trees. And as the trees grow, their interaction with the environment ensures that the place is much more bettered. Now, the people that are in the land will also be affected by the message, by the food, and by the quality of life that nature that has been improved comes with it. You were at our training site in Kijabe, and you saw the trees that are there, the flowers and the landscaping. That is, you're not just doing crops for food, you're also doing trees and plants for health, and health for the people who are living within the environment. And so, yes, it gives it the original purpose. It gives it the original intent of the Creator. Think about it in this way. When you read Genesis 1, Genesis 2, for those of us who would like to follow through the Bible, you will notice that God did not only create man and land, He created trees and insects. His intention was their interaction would bring out a wealth of life that is much better.
So if we see on a global perspective, we sit here in Kenya. Are there other countries where farming God's way is active?
Well, we thank God. Farming God's Way began in Zimbabwe by a wonderful gentleman called Brian Aldrives, who himself was a commercial farmer and was really failing in it. And so he decided to go into the forest, which was his practice, to ask God for wisdom. And from the forest, he learned concepts in the forest and brought those concepts on his land. And from Zimbabwe, we are seeing Africa. Africa has, the movement of Farming God's Way has reached from the south of Africa, South Africa, all the way to the northern, the Horn of Africa. East Africa has Farming God's Way in all the countries in East Africa. So Kenya, Rwanda, Burundi, Tanzania, and Uganda. We are seeing Farming God's Way in the northern parts of Africa. And so you're looking at Ethiopia, Egypt, and those countries there, and Nigeria as well. Sierra Leone and Liberia, we have Farming God's Way. Farming God's Way is not only in Africa, it started in Africa, but it's not only in Africa, we are seeing it in India. We are seeing it in parts of America. We are seeing it in parts of England. Our training alone, we are not the only outfit that is actually doing Farming God's Way, because it's a global movement. We are part of the global movement. Our own trainings alone have trained people from as many as 24 different countries, some of which are outside Kenya. But the bulk of our trainings have been in Kenya and Tanzania and Uganda.
So if someone in Europe would be interested in such kind of training and seeing it implemented,
Yes,
would also be possible.
it will be very possible. You can reach out to us, Creation Stewards International, and we will give you a proper introduction to it and also afford you some kind of follow-up. We have what is also called the accredited Farming God's Way accredited trainers, of which I'm one of them, and they're scattered all over the world. You can be attached to one of them as well, and you can also find your training. You can also go to Farming God's Way, the Farming God's Way online website, and that can also give you directions.
So let's come to a closing. What would you like to share with the audience as a closing thought?
I am passionate, coming from Africa and seeing people, and Kenya, and seeing people die of hunger, seeing people really struggle, seeing people die and lose hope, seeing farmers doing the same thing year in, year out, and having very little to feed from. Today in Kenya, if you want to tell people that your life is so hard, you just tell them that I'm a farmer. And they will immediately, the concept immediately says, this guy is not doing well. I am passionate about seeing transformation in the lands, in the families, in the people, and even in their faith. And so my encouragement to anyone watching and everyone watching, you can be part of this in two ways. One, you can practice it. You can take on the burden of actually making sure that not only do you improve your soils and your land, but you also teach others to improve their soils and their lands. And in one way, if you affect one person and I affect another person, we will be doing something that will be much better for creation. You can teach somebody, you can fish for somebody, and you'll give him only food for one day. But if you can teach them to fish, then you'll have empowered them to be having food throughout. Secondly, also, transformation does not necessarily have to end with your land. Your life can also be transformed to the same. And that is my thoughts.
Thank you so much for this insightful conversation and for sharing your experiences. Thank you for the time we had together, the 4 working days. Early in the morning till late, we were tired. And to whoever is interested in to know more about this different kind of approach of farming, don't hesitate to reach out to me on LinkedIn. And I will make sure I bring you in contact with the right people. Wish you all the best. Goodbye.
Thank you.